So I personally have been fascinated by the Navy SEALs for years, and particularly one of the most distinguishing features of the SEALs is their selection process. Now, while I don't think that we need to throw athletes into freezing water or have them rolling in the sand doing push-ups on the beaches, I strongly believe that we need to be challenging today's athletes more than we currently are. We need to be pushing them past their perceived physical and mental limits, and doing so in a supportive team environment. And when we do that, I really believe we will not only help develop team cohesion through that shared suffering, but greater mental resilience. Now, today's guest is someone who has a lot of experience on what I am talking about. He's swam under ships in shark-infested waters. He's jumped out of airplanes at night over the Arctic Circle. He's responded to terrorist threats to a commercial airliner at 35,000 feet. And most terrifying and interesting, I think, for him, is that he's gone on stage to perform stand-up comedy at this stage in his career. Today's guest is Jonathan Cleck. He has experienced intense fear, studied it, and learned to laugh about it. From his experience as a career officer in the Navy SEALs, to his time as an FBI task force and federal air marshal, to his academic background as a doctoral candidate studying human performance and humor. Now, Jonathan today is going to share his insights into the Navy SEALs, stress and team building. And part one of our conversations is really going to focus actually in on that selection process, the BUDS selection process for the Navy SEALs. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerbun, and I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Nate Sanderson. Betsy Butterick sat today's interview out. If you'd like to learn more about our work supporting coaches, head on over to tocculture.com, where you can learn about our online courses, our one-on-one coaching, and you can just subscribe to our weekly newsletter and get the notes to this episode and every episode of the Coaching Culture Podcast. All right, Jonathan, welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I don't know if I've had as much fun pre-recording, talking with a guest here. So I know today's conversation is going to be a lot of fun, but I've actually wanted to have a Navy SEAL on the podcast for quite some time because, we're a big fan of just some of the stuff that's been written about the SEALs as far as teams and leadership. I think you're our second military leader or person from the military that's been on the podcast. Before we had Captain Mike Abershoff, who wrote It's Your Ship, which was a great listen. So I know today's going to be a great conversation. So thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. When you said I wanted to have a Navy SEAL, I can think of 1,000 names of guys like Goggins and Jocko and all these like high profile names. I guess you literally, what'd you have, like a list of like 300 dudes and they all said no. And then finally you're like, oh, I guess here's one. Here, we'll get this bald middle-aged guy and who's kind of funny. We'll see if he can bring anything of value.
Well, don't downplay. You're gonna be a great guest here. And the reality is you have something, an experience which unites all Navy SEALs, which is you went through BUDS, right? And BUDS is something that I kind of want to start our conversation on today because it's something that's talked about in the Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, which was kind of my first introduction to what it's about and just how the shared suffering kind of tends to bring a team together. I'm also fascinated if, a full disclosure, I've always wondered, could I have made it through BUDS? Like in another life, I was a military guy and I always wanted to have gone through it. But anyways, let's start with just BUDS and just tell us a little bit about, for the listeners, just what is BUDS? What is that process like for you?
Sure. There, you said that common denominator that all SEALs go through. And I think I don't know that it going through BUDS. You're going through something very momentous and transformational. And that's a good word for it. It's transformational. And transformational is probably undersells just how radical the transformation is going to be. You've never gone anything through like that before. And you probably won't go through anything as transformational as that again in your life. And I think I don't speak for all SEALs, but I think I speak for a lot of the guys that I've been fortunate to interact with through my time in the community. That BUDS is so radically transformational, and I say so radically transformational that anybody who talks about buds, or anybody who talks about their time in the teams, whether that's, the Jockos or the Goggins of the world, or guys from SEAL Team 6 who did, 500 combat missions. And so 500 combat missions is a lot. And those guys have so much more to talk about from the combat experience, but yet they will still come back to buds. They'll still, when they tell stories, even that combat experience will still come back to, well, this was the foundation for this was laid in buds. Or, when I was in, in combat, or when I was in, in Afghanistan, and we had been awake for 3 days on this surveillance op, like, thankfully I had been conditioned to stay awake for 5.5, 6 days through Hell Week. So it all comes back. And that's something that as I've gotten older, I've reflected on how transformational buds is and how impactful it'll be for the rest of your life. And it really does set that foundation for opening your mind to how much further your body and your mind can go when you've passed the limits of what you thought was humanly possible. And that is essentially what buds does, is it tests your limits. And because you can quit at any point, you don't have to go through like a request, process. Am I permitted to quit? No, you can just say, no, thanks. I'd rather go work in the fleet. I'd rather go, work on a radar system or go work on an aircraft carrier. You can do that in a heartbeat. There's no shame in it. And people quit all the time. But because you can quit at any time, it is truly the test of, there's a couple things that they're assessing, but are you in it for the right reasons? Are you truly committed to achieving this goal? And do you have the willpower and the fortitude to turn off that option to quit, to get through extraordinary discomfort?
And I love that word you use, transformational. It's something we use a lot on this podcast, because we're talking about transformational coaching and the impact that we want to have on athletes. And yet what you talk about this being the most transformational thing, I think there's a struggle in transformational coaching that I have, which is this idea that we want to be able to have an impact on every athlete that comes into our program.
Yeah.
And yet one of the things that makes buds, a selection process, so transformational is the fact that few people, I think it's 15% lately, in the bud selection process, choose to actually endure that and go through that. But yet that option of the choice seems to be really impactful. The option thing is one thing I find very interesting, but I also am curious, what else besides just being really, 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 really hard, what else and how do they design buds in this selection process helps it to make it impactful and transformational? Like, I have a guess that log PT does something unique because there's a shared burden load of carrying the logs and what that means for team cohesion. But that's just my guess. But just what about how they actually create what are the conditions they create within buds that actually help to make it more transformational and bring more team cohesion?
Sure. And that's there's a lot to unpack in that answer, because there's no singular element of buds that does that. But so you alluded to teamwork, and the teamwork piece that is reinforced in buds, and that is certainly a thing, which is an interesting almost contradiction in the way buds happens, because it's every man for himself, in as much as if I'm, and it happens, every guy in buds experiences, the guy on your left and the guy on your right go, I'm done, I'm quitting. And so there is a team mindset until somebody goes to quit. And then there's a every man for himself mindset, right? And it's not an every man for himself. It's not in a negative context. It's, hey, I'm trying to be part of the A team, and those guys are good human beings, and they're good otherwise. They just weren't cut out for, or mentally, just they decided that this wasn't the career path for them. and I'm okay with that. I can still be buddies with them. I can still have a long relationship, friendship with them. But in terms of weeding out the people that I want to operate with, and maybe that's a little bit more closer to where the coaching comes in. How do you get down to the people that really want to be there? So there's a team mindset that's reinforced through the log PT and carrying the boats on your head and paddling, out in the boats. It's very team oriented, and it's forcing you to work in very strenuous and stressful situations, especially paddling out through these high waves where you're going to get knocked over, and the instructors are putting all kinds of stress on you. You do have to work together as a team, even when you might not love the guy next to you, because you've been with him in buds for 3 months straight, 6 days a week, and you're just at each other's throats, but you still have to work through that. So there's the team mindset, and we can come back and unpack that a little bit. But you and I'm going to paraphrase, you said something about like, what else does buds do? So the Hollywood image of buds focuses very much on the physical piece. It is the log PT, and it's the obstacle course and things like that. And there is a physical element to buds. It's a very physical. I mean, I'm not kidding anybody to say that it's not physical, but it's not the physicality that really is the trying time. It's the mindset and the barriers they place on being physical. And I've always said, you can have really good runners, and you do have really good runners in buds, and you have guys that are super strong upper bodies that can do pull-ups until the sun comes up, and so there's incredible athletes where I think buds level sets, and this is why I think buds is very unique in this way, is you can't they bring in other factors that you can't be tougher than. The cold water. I don't care how long you can run, or how long you can hold your breath, or how many push-ups you can do. You can't be tougher than the cold. You can't be tougher than that cold water. That gets everybody. And it levels the playing field for everybody, because you're all out there shivering and freezing together. And there's nothing like making you reconsider how badly you want this when your body is so cold that you lose feeling and you're shivering, and that cold is the great equalizer. So there's that. It's doing those things with an element of extreme discomfort that I think that's where you see guys figure out, can I push past this, or is this just not for me?
I think one of the things that I see in the Hollywood version or the dramatized version of the buds training, my perspective of it was that this is really an individual challenge. Like, can I personally get through, what you're describing here, this week of suffering and challenge? And certainly there's a huge component of that, right? But I think, as I've just read different accounts, and you read the Goggins books and, Jocko's work and stuff like that, is that what emerges apparently during the week is also just characteristics of how to be a great teammate in the midst of suffering, and what leadership emerges in the midst of all of that discomfort. And so, in your experience, what are some of the characteristics of the great teammate that comes out of that kind of shared experience?
Wow. Yeah, there's certainly, you're absolutely right. During the course of not just Hell Week, but buds in general, you do start, as you start to get rid of the people that have chosen not to be there, for whatever one reason or another. And it doesn't really matter why. But you start to get down to the people that want to be there, and the people that have the capacity to endure tremendous, discomfort, and who have the will. And and it's not just discomfort. That's one of the things that Hollywood has a hard time showing. How do you show somebody in pain or discomfort? Not even pain, just discomfort, constant discomfort. How do you show that level of cold? It's much easier to show somebody struggling, under the weight of a giant log. Audiences can go, oh, I can understand that. I can relate to that. It's relatable. It is those other elements that really are are part of the things that make people quit. So let me go back to answer your question, Nate. What are those things that emerge over the course of the week? One is you find out who's there for the right reasons and who's really there. Not just a week, but I'm saying over the course of 6 months of buds. But there's also a determination that and I say not just a determination. There's a mindset that the team becomes more cohesive the more they've endured some very challenging things. And for coaches, I think that's something that I've strived to, not at the youth sports level, like I'm not sitting out there spraying them with a fire hose. I've thought about it, but the cohesiveness that comes through going through very trying circumstances together and having come out on the back end, that is one of the things that gels teams together. So for coaches, it's not just going through these plays together. It's getting outside, getting off the pitch, getting out off the court, and going and doing something that brings your team together where they have to work together as a team. And so for coaches at the youth level, there are opportunities to do this at a scaled back version, but putting your teams under duress, and I use that term loosely, for youth sports or even like teenage sports, putting your teams under stress. The end result of that is that they'll have greater tolerance for each other. They'll have greater camaraderie and bond with each other. They'll have greater ability to be creative and problem solve. So that's one part. And then Nate, to answer the other part of your question is you learn, and this is very cool part about buds, the officers and the enlisted. So the managers and the worker bees all go through the same training and they go through together. And you learn that leadership is a series of behaviors. It is not a status. There are officers who have different levels of responsibility, but that's not the same thing as leadership. And I'll tell you, when we work in joint environments, and that doesn't make us right or wrong, it's just how we are conditioned. But when we work in joint environments, the SEAL teams, a lot of times we're frustrating to the Marines or to the Army because they're very regimented about chain of command and structure and things like that. And they see us as a little more loosey-goosey about it. Like we take a little bit more liberties with chain of command or respect for authority. And I don't know that that's a 100% accurate reflection of who we are. We respect chain of command, we respect authority and the responsibilities that a chief would have, or a lieutenant or a commander would have through that shared experience in buds, through the crucible. We recognize that leadership is far less about the title that you've been given. And this is for, probably your coaches work in hierarchical organizations a lot. In the SEAL teams, we have that chain of command and we have that structure. But in terms of tapping into and trusting leadership at the lowest levels, that is something that is born from our experience in buds. And I think you'll see a lot of SEALs that go on to either lead at the highest levels in the Navy or go in and lead in other organizations. And so for coaches, even at the youth level, you go, hey, Billy, we ran this play. You were on the field and I know you're only 11. What'd you think of it? What would you do differently? And that's something that that we get from buds that I think we carry into the rest of our time and in working in organizations.
Yeah, I want to come back to some more of your thoughts around leadership and how the SEALs have influenced that. But a few more things I want to unpack around buds, because I think there are some things that are really practical that coaches can take away. So tell me what your thoughts are on this. So when I started, doing personally, actually I was doing a lot of CrossFit, about 10, 12 years ago, which, has some connections to some military type selection stuff, I think in a lot of ways, right? With the Murph workout, things like that. But also I had read, came across, the Culture Code by Coyle, and he talks about log PT. What I found really interesting that coaches could do was, all right, we may not be able to get a big log and have everybody carrying this log, but I could say, hey, your group, you're going to go run this amount of distance and you got this big weight. You just got to get it there. Or you all got to do 1,000 push-ups. I don't care how you break it up, but you just got to get 1,000 as a group. And what we try to do in those team settings is by giving them a mission and saying, I don't care how you get it done. You just got to get it done.
Yeah.
Certain people struggle. Certain people are stronger than others. Yeah. And when that person's struggling, the team says, hey, we want the team to be successful. We want them to get there quickly. Right. In the good teams, I when we're doing this type of stuff, an athlete, stronger athlete, will say, well, I'll do 10 extra push-ups, or I'll carry this a little bit longer. It's not about equal sharing of the load, right? So is that what is kind of created somewhat in the bud selection process, is a bit of this stepping up and this struggle and shared vulnerability in that regard?
There is. It's the shared struggle, and certainly people emerge as stronger in certain things. By the end of buds, again, it's hard to lump buds in one broad brushstroke, but by the end, you have everybody recognizes the value of not just pitching in where they're comfortable and where their strengths lie, but just pitching in where the team needs it. I'll tell you, my kids will laugh because that's all they've ever known is this mantra that I took from the teams, which is team, teammate, self. And that's the priority in which we take care of actions. And it's the priority that we rank what needs to be done is what needs to be done for the team first, what needs to be done for my teammate, and then lastly, what needs to be done for myself. When you come back off those operations, everybody on the team is very clear that the priority is team, teammate, self. And it doesn't come easy. You have to reinforce it. We get it reinforced through buds. And even when we get back to the team, it's reinforced when you check into your team. It's reinforced there, that team, teammate, self. And that's the priority with which you take care of stuff. So at the end of practice, if you're collecting your mouth guard and your soccer ball or your lacrosse stick, you're wrong. Everybody should be running around collecting the cones on the field and pulling the nets in, anything that's common to the team first. Then, and this is where I was saying, what's a really cool thing is if there's 12 kids on a team, if all 12 kids are each asking what the other 11 can need help with, the really cool part is you never get to your own stuff. You never have to take care of your own stuff. You're like, hey, I need to put my lacrosse stick in my bag. Hey, man, let me take care of that for you. I'm collecting a bunch of lacrosse sticks. Let me take care of that for you. Hey, do you mind going and collecting all the balls off the field or something? If everybody takes care of everybody else, you never actually get to yourself. And I'm not saying never. Of course, you're going to take care of your own stuff. But it's a really cool thing that happens. You talk about transformation. It's a cool transformation when the team starts thinking of the team first and then their buddies next, and they think of themselves last. And there's a variety of ways that coaches can do this and kind of condition the team, teammate, self. That mindset transfers to the actions on the playing field. If I'm not just thinking about me being the star, when that happens for coaches, like that's the magic of everybody coming together and thinking of the team and their teammates first.
Yeah, and buds starts to lay the foundation for creating that type of mindset,
100%.
Which is so powerful. One of the things that a lot of the teams I work with do and I've written about before is just we have leadership councils where we have there's 16 players on the team. There's 4 leaders that have units, and each unit kind of all built off the kind of the Navy SEAL bud selection thing. Hey, you're going to be in a group of 4, 5, or 6. And so then it's just like the coach just goes to the leadership council leader and it's just like, hey, you guys get the locker room, you guys get the bus loaded, you guys got here, go take care of it. What I love about doing that is that you're giving these captains, whatever, leaders in a leadership group, real leadership experience, because they got to go figure out how to motivate those guys and get them to do it and do a good job, things like that. So just love what you're sharing there. I think there's so many connections, and coaches might be thinking, well, I'm not going to put my kids into freezing cold water. No, but you can still get them doing hard things, and you can still do it in a way that isn't just doing hard things out there by themselves, 15 guys all trying to survive, but you're doing it in a way where there's that shared suffering, there's that common missions and goals.
Yeah. And
They're not-
shared frustration. I would just, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say,
yeah.
it's not just the cold water, but it's shared frustration in having to get to the end result of us, whatever the goal that the coach set for us as a team. It's the shared frustration. You don't have to be in cold water or have sand in your armpits to do that, but there's a frustration and there's creative ways that you can create frustration that forces them to work through it. Things like, having to do it in silence or having to work one hand, or, half the team is blindfolded or whatever. There's ways you can do things, or just creating a barrier that they have to overcome, and it's a frustration that is, and I'm not a psychologist who can dissect and say whether it's right or wrong, but there is tremendous, and I don't know if it's as equal as the cold water, but there's tremendous power in having to achieve a goal where there's barriers and there's frustration that's going to create tension between the team. And the coach says, hey, I don't care if there's tension between your team or not. You have to accomplish this. And through that, the team will be forced to work through it. And at the end, that's where, you can have a laugh, you can have a joke about it, and be like, Mikey, I thought I was going to kill you like when we did that. And that creates a bond and that shared experience. But just for coaches to find a way to inject some frustration or inject a barrier that they have to overcome that's going to frustrate the team, that has a tremendous power to it as well. In youth sports in particular, as we talk about youth, even into high school sports, that's where you can really impact. They're so malleable, where you can teach them things through sports that they will carry for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and I think that frustration piece is huge. I remember hearing this psychologist. You said you're not a psychologist, but I remember recently hearing Dr. Becky Kennedy, who is a psychologist, works with a lot of parents. I don't know if you've heard her on talk on the Huberman Lab podcast about how she really believes that so much of the challenges and frustrations or challenges around mental health with young people is their inability to deal with frustration, because today's and she pointed out really beautifully how, because of technology, we don't actually have to deal with our frustrations, even as adults. Like if something, even boredom, right? We just pull out our phone, right? We don't have to go to Blockbuster video to get a video anymore, only to show up and it not be there. You just pull up Netflix, and, we get frustrated in our house. It's like, actually, which app is this movie on? Like, I have to look that up. These are our frustrations are just so minimal, and we can easily just, do something that's going to relieve ourselves of the frustration. So if we can teach our kids to deal with that frustration, it can be so valuable. I want to come back to the mental side of things, because there's something there unpacked. I know you work with teams and organizations around that, but before that, I just one more question around buds, and then maybe Nate's got a question as well too on this. But the idea is like a Full Metal Jacket. The leaders are just ripping guys and just tearing them down and calling them names. Maybe that's the way it needs to be at buds. I don't know if that's the way it is, but I kind of always encourage coaches, hey, you don't have to be ripping kids or tearing them down in this. You can be encouraging them through these hard things, let them know that you believe in them. I guess I just didn't know if you could speak to that. Like, is there an aspect of that in buds that is also the mental aspect? Is you've got these drill sergeants just ripping you, or is it, what's that atmosphere like?
Buds is unique that way. And it's not like Marine Corps boot camp. And let me say that I come from a family of some Marines. Marine Corps boot camp is designed that way for a very specific reason, because you have 18-year-old kids that come in and they need to be reset and welcomed to a new way of thinking and a new way of acting and a new standard of personal behavior. So it is designed and it's very effective. I mean, the Marines have been doing it that way for 80, 100 years, and they're very effective that way. Buds is a little bit different because it's voluntary, and because there's a little bit of a, how would you describe it? There's almost a little bit of a condescension, and I don't know that's an accurate description for it. There's not a lot of yelling at you, like, you piece of shit, you blah 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 blah. There's not a lot of that, because the elements do a lot of the work for the instructors. So there's almost a little bit of I mean, buds is one of the funniest things I've ever experienced. And I've often described buds as, the greatest time in my life that I'd never want to do again. Because you are awake. Your body, your mind are awakening to things that you never knew possible. Like, but you know what? If you'd asked me before Hell Week, could you stay awake for 6 days? No. And I like people say 5.5 days. No, you're awake for 6 days. Let's be clear. And even if you're getting any sleep the night before, but Hell Week actually kicks off, and you're probably not, because you're so nervous about going into Bud. So you're already going in like on a sleep deficit, going into a 6-day cycle of having no sleep. So, but could you do that? If you ask, whatever, 20-year-old John, if he could do that, I've been like, I don't know how. Like, I stay awake for 6 days. I've pulled an all-nighter studying for finals, and I was a zombie. How am I going to do 6 days? Yeah, somehow you do it. And so so you're going through Buds with this awakening, and this like existential, just epiphany. It's a hilarious way that, and every instructor is different. There's all different personalities, but there's a little bit of an arrogance in the way they instruct. Like, I'm here. I have a trident on my chest. You don't. I don't have to yell at you. You can quit. I'm going to let we have a standard that you have to meet. You have to do the O course, the obstacle course, in a certain amount of time. You have to run. When I tell you to go get wet and sandy, I don't have to yell at you. I could say it in a normal, like, banker's voice. Go get wet and sandy. And there's no emphasis that needs to be put on it. I gave you an order to go get in the ocean, roll around in the ocean, come out of the ocean, roll around in the sand. And that's it. There's no middle ground where like Bud student John gets to say, well, to what level do you want me to get wet? How about just from the knees down? It's like, there's just so it's sort of a different approach to that. How does that translate for coaches? There's a time to be intense, and there's a time for intensity, and they certainly do. Like during Hell Week, the instructors kind of take off the gloves. There's a level of intensity because they're trying to create a chaos. And if you're trying to create stress, there is a time for you as a coach to be yelling, "Hurry up! What's your decision? Make a decision. Let's go! Come on, make a decision!" And that adds a level of anxiety and stress and forces somebody to work through it. And I actually love that. But if you're always doing that, then you're never doing it. Does that make sense? Like, if you're always injecting high levels of stress, you're sort of inoculating them to actually operating under a higher level of duress. That should be something that ebbs and flows because you want them to experience. If you're always the coach who's yelling at them, then you're probably, you're missing an opportunity to connect with them emotionally and connect with them and inspire them. People follow people that they respect and admire, and that's who you're going for. Somebody's just screaming and yelling at you and you're creating duress all the time. Probably not. And I think between the three of us, we could probably list a number of coaches from our youth sports and just, people in our lives, men in our lives growing up that were like that. And you're like, just didn't connect to me. So that's again, not being, I'm sure there's psychologists who can speak better, more eloquently to that than I can, but that's from my own observations and from observations of Buds. It's the level of intensity has to ebb and flow. Otherwise, if you're always intense, then you're never intense.
So we're going to take a break there in our conversation with Jonathan Cleck. I absolutely loved that last bit about us creating stress as coaches. Like, too often we just do that unintentionally by yelling and screaming from the sidelines. So it's kind of cool to get that affirmation from a Navy SEAL on something that I know and I strongly believe in, as well as many listeners of the podcast. Thanks for listening today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and also support us by sharing these episodes on social media and leaving us a review wherever you listen to podcasts.